Hello, friends. This week's sponsors are Saintly Heart and Brother Francis. Saintly Heart is a family-owned and operated Catholic toy company creating faith-based educational toys carefully designed by speech pathologist Maggie Jetty. Their goal is to provide high-quality toys that will enrich children's lives by combining faith, education, and tactile play. Brother Francis is a popular animated program created to teach kids the basic principles of our Catholic faith in a fun and engaging way. With 22 episodes and counting, plus books, games, and other products, this program is used in Catholic homes, schools, and parishes to help children understand and grow in faith. Saintly Heart and Brother Francis have recently teamed up to offer parents an exceptional line of toys that encourage children to learn about their faith through hands-on exploration. I've seen these products and they are going to make amazing gifts for Catholic kids in your life. And in support of the Eucharistic Revival, their best-selling church playset will help children learn about the beauty of the Eucharist and Mass right in your own home. Featuring 28 wooden figures, a magnetic box designed to provide a church backdrop, and an information card that explains the purpose for the vessels and sacramentals, your child is sure to deepen their understanding of the Mass while they play. Other toys included in this exclusive collaboration include a Stations of the Cross, Pray and Play set, and a 7 Sacraments puzzle, with new toys launching very soon, just in time for all your Christmas shopping. To introduce the children, grandchildren, or godchildren in your life to the beauty of our faith, be sure to visit saintlyheart.com and brotherfrancis.com. Use the code TOGETHER for 15% off full price products. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Abiding Together podcast, season 13. And we are delighted to be with you on this adventure. And I know that the Lord is going to do wonderful things in all of our hearts. The Abiding Together podcast is a place where you can find connection, rest, and encouragement on your journey with Jesus Christ. And wherever you find yourself in the world, wherever you find yourself in your life, you are most welcome here. And we know that the Lord will speak to you. My name is Sister Miriam James Heidland, and every week I am joined by 2 of my very dearest friends, Heather Kim and Michelle Benzinger. And we speak about what the Lord is doing in our life. We speak about our sorrowful mysteries, our joyful mysteries, and how the Lord is leading us in it all. And you are most welcome right here, right here. So please grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and welcome home. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Abiding Together podcast. And we are going to spend some time talking about cultivating silence and solitude. So we're just going to be silent for 30 minutes and that'll be it. So
Best episode ever.
Like they didn't really say much. And we've already solved all the world's problems. So I just want to tell everybody.
Yes.
We've already been on the call for like 30 minutes and we've solved all the problems. So if anybody has any problems, we've solved them for you. So
Yeah. So take heart.
We haven't solved anything. Like,
oh, shoot.
We didn't? Oh, well, we talked about everything.
We like to feel like we did, at least.
Well, I mean, after you sit around and talk about things for a long time, you're like, I think we solved that.
I think we've got it. Yeah. It's out there. You know? Okay.
Yeah.
So I just woke up, just rolled out of bed like 35 minutes ago. So I still have PJ bottoms on. But Michelle, you are looking fabulous this morning.
She's got a
thank
game
you.
face on.
Thank you. I
She's
have a
ready.
meeting at the school afterwards and a couple other meetings that I have to look professional. So it only happens once in a while. There you go.
You do.
Yep.
You got your fall lipstick on.
I
even.
do.
You got your hair done.
I do.
All the
I
things.
even have my nails done, which I never get my nails done.
Get out.
Yep.
Things you'll never hear on Poco
There
podcast
you
right
go.
here. You will never hear ever.
Exclusive content over here.
Take that, Father Mark Mary.
There you go.
So there you go. Yeah.
He calls us the other podcast. Someone talks us. You know, like Ohio State and Michigan refer to each other as the other school. We're the other podcast. But don't worry, we still love you guys so much, Poco. We don't think of you the other.
I like
Yes,
these playful
they're
guys.
awesome.
It's true. It is.
Them,
lovely.
Father Dave and Deacon Bob, same. You know, they just love those guys.
That is true. That is true. That is true. Well, friends, we thought as we kind of journey into fall and we prepare for Advent coming up, soon enough, we would spend a little time about cultivating silence and solitude, without which the soul cannot thrive and flourish. And we're made for that. And John Paul II talks about that original solitude of turning our hearts completely toward the Lord and receiving our identity from Him and experiencing that foundational relationship first before everything else. So we're going to use actually a scripture quote from 1 Kings chapter 19, and that is Elijah in pursuit or leaving the pursuit of Jezebel, and he's going to go out into the wilderness. And such a great chapter 19. The whole is so great, chapter 19. But I'm going to read verses 11 through 13 as Elijah flees and he goes out into the mountain, into the cave, and he's hiding. God said, Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And there's so much we can talk about in that. We have a couple other quotes we're going to get to as we walk through this. But Michelle, as we consider cultivating silence and solitude, what is on your heart that you want to share right away with our listeners?
Yeah, I love this whole scripture. Like, I think this is a good one to sit down with, and really do Lexia with, really just see like what pops out to you, what the Lord is saying, what he stirs to you. But like, I love the beginning of that scripture in verse 3 when he says, "I've had enough, Lord. Like, I've had enough. Take my life. I'm done." And then he goes to sleep, and I was just laughing. I'm like, isn't it just sometimes we just need a good nap? Like, we just need to go take a nap or a bath or do something. Like, I just need to go to sleep. And then the angels come and minister to him, and then they feed him. And I was just struck by that, like how he met his physical needs. And then he met his spiritual needs first. And sometimes that's what we need. We need to attune to our physical needs and then our spiritual needs. But that, I think I've said this before on the podcast, I'm learning more and more. The Lord is the Lord of grand gestures. Like, he does part the Red Sea and he does all this. But the Lord oftentimes he does the miraculous in the everyday in the still small voice. And that when a quiet whisper, someone is whispering, you have to lean in close so you can hear them. Like, what did you say? I can't hear you. So you have to lean in close and get closer. So when we hear the Lord in the still small voice, it's when we lean in and get quiet and get closer that he speaks. He speaks to our heart. He speaks intimately. That's when we take the posture of the beloved, and feeling really strongly in a world full of distractions, like we were talking about, being the sacrament of the present moment. What solitude, original solitude, as you were saying, sister, with JP2, like what time do we just need to be with the Lord, like walking with the Lord? And so we can hear the still small voice, because I feel like the voice of the world is so loud right now. And he's inviting us to, listen to him, come away with him into the still small voice, to hear a still small voice. Heather, what are your thoughts?
I love what you're saying there. And I think that we don't realize how much noise we're living with. So I'm from Vancouver in the west coast of Canada, and I would go down to visit Jake's family from Alabama. And in the summer, we'd go outside at night and he'd be like, "Oh, it's so quiet." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? It's a racket out here." Like the cicadas and or katydids, as they call them, were so loud to me. But he was like, "What are you talking? What?" And he couldn't. It was like he was so used to that noise, like he couldn't even recognize it. He goes, "Well, what does it sound like where you live?" And I said, "Nothing. It sounds like nothing when you go outside, because we don't have these
frogs
bugs
every now and then." Yeah,
I know.
a couple loons. That's it.
That's it. And I'm like, just reflecting on that personally, I'm like, there's so much noise in the background that I just get accustomed to having there, constantly, like a constant buzz, whether it be podcasts or things that are just on all the time, or people talking, or just, music on even, like, and those things aren't bad in and of themselves. But I think actually becoming silent is very, very rare. And it's a big jump for a lot of us to go from the noise level that we're used to just having in the background, or even within our own hearts and minds, interior noise, that it's a big jump to just go to silence. So I think sometimes we need a bridge into silence, which we can hopefully talk about. But sister, I'm curious, what are your first thoughts?
I was thinking, I'm not sure if it was Dr. Jordan Peterson or Elon Musk that was speaking recently about a recent study that was done with people where they could have a choice to sit alone by themselves for 15 minutes, or sit alone by themselves, but be shocked by like a little shocker that would kind of allow a dopamine response. And most of them chose to be shocked by the electrical shocker several times. And I guess you could press it. I'd have to read the whole study, but press it as often as you wanted. But most people chose that. And I was just thinking of the wild experiment that technology is performing on our brains that humans we don't know how it's going to turn out. And we're so used to the dopamine hit. We're so used to the constant information, the flux of information, even when it's overwhelming, we're so used to it. And to even experience an absence of that. Like I was reading another study of certain high schools banning cell phones in the high schools. And shockingly enough, they're finding that children actually learn.
Yes.
I'm like,
Go figure.
we had to do a study to like figure that out. Or like, cause none of us grew up with cell phones. We didn't have any of that. And I'm not talking about just that, because there's even before cell phones, there's a million things you can distract yourself with. It's not that. But I was thinking of, what is the fear of, we talk about original solitude and how God creates, and Mother Teresa says, God creates in silence. He forms the earth in silence. Everything happens in silence. And I was thinking, what's the fear of solitude and silence for us? And I know just for many years in my life, struggling with those two things of solitude and silence because of what I thought they meant. So just, I think on the outset to help us all understand, when we're talking about solitude, we're not talking about isolation. Because solitude is being alone with God. Isolation is me being by myself. And that's two totally different realities. And I think for some of us, our belief is solitude and silence means I'm going to, and it hits all of our abandonment wounds, or it hits our fear of rejection, or like, what if I miss out? What's going to happen? I have to know constantly what's going on. But when we speak about solitude, we're speaking about being alone with the one who created us, not just me by myself. If it's real solitude, it brings about communion, not isolation and abandonment. So I think that's something I have to continue to go back to. Like, what is real solitude, and what is God inviting you and I to in that reality? Because that's the primal reality of us with the Lord. And then it's from that we can give the gift of ourselves.
St. Paul of the Cross, he's like the first Passionist priest. He talks about the link between silence and trust. And what you're saying, sister, it just was reminding me that like a lot of times we as people have the impression that silence is hurtful.
Oh, that's a good word.
In some way,
the
like
silent treatment.
we get the silent treatment. I grew up in a family that had that like pretty strong, like in my grandmother and all of that, and so silence can be associated with pain or rejection or whatever. And so sometimes when we enter into silence, we might be afraid that God will then be silent. And our assumption is that silence from God, or even us getting silent, that there's going to be a loss there, like you were saying, that it's going to be some sense of rejection, or we're going to not have enough resources. And so we can be very afraid and actually just try to avoid all of that. Whereas St. Paul of the Cross, he keeps talking about this link between silence and trust. And he said, even when Jesus stood before Pilate, he was able to be silent when he was asked the questions and not feel the need to defend himself because of his deep trust in the Father. And so we're talking about silence in different forms right now, like not just cultivating silence to pray, but there is an aspect of trust that I think we have to look at. That would be like, that's an important meditation when we approach it.
And I think that when you allow yourself to enter into silence and enter into solitude, when you're able, the Lord starts revealing things and puts his fingers on things and they come to the light. And some of it is painful things, like the fragmented parts of yourself. And you're like, I don't really want to look at this. So let me just avoid silence altogether. Let me avoid silence and solitude, because that there is a process. It's a painful process sometimes, but that process leads to the resurrection. It's a crucifixion of things. It's an integration of things. It's a part of the spiritual journey. And like, I remember when I did my first silent retreat, I was a student at Franciscan, and actually Father Dave Bavanka was leading it. And Heather, you were there with me. You did, I think, the music for it. Yeah. And so like the first day we were there, I was like, okay. Second day, I was like, all right, I am done. Like, I need to talk to someone. And I went to confession and had a really good confession. The third day, I went to confession again. And Father Dave's like, you do not need to go to confession. You can't talk. You haven't sinned. I was like, I just have to talk to somebody. I can't be by myself anymore. He's like, go back to pray.
I went to confession twice on the Saturday just to keep talking.
Talking to somebody. I was like, I have to talk to somebody. It was just like, but it was so, like, I didn't know how to quiet my soul. Like, I didn't know how. And and now I'm like, okay, bring it on. Like the quietness of it, especially with kids all the time. And I feel like Waffle House, we're open 24/7. And so, like, okay, I need some quiet people.
Yeah, there's a beautiful quote here that you put in the show notes, Michelle, and it says from Catherine Doherty. And she said, silence will heal the wounds inflicted by the endless words that swarm around us, exhaust us, tire us beyond all tiredness. We need silence in our noisy, work-filled life as a child needs its mother's milk. We need to be alone with God. we need that silence to be able to speak a few words charged with our love, charged with Christ. And I was just thinking even also of, there's a time in Ecclesiastes, there's a time to speak, there's a time to be silent. And I just was thinking of how often, how Jesus, when Jesus would speak, it would be words that were effective. I mean, he is the word, but Jesus didn't talk just to talk. And we've all done that thing where you're talking just to talk and you're like, I'm just saying, I'm uncomfortable right now, or I don't know what to do. So I'm just going to keep talking. And there's really no need. And just like how those, yeah, it's just amazing of looking at Christ and looking at Our Lady, and when we use words and when it's better to be silent, and not to punish people, but it's like, sometimes we don't have anything charitable to say, and it's just better to not say anything and just ask the Lord to change our hearts. So I think there's so many ways of cultivating silence, of how the Lord is inviting us to that. Yeah, it's just great stuff to pray about.
Yeah. And I think because this is becoming a very weak muscle for most of us, just because, especially because of our phones and access and people's access to us. Like, it's not even, yes, it's the social media and all of that, but just being constantly reached, by people. Like
Yes.
I left my phone at home one day by accident. You have the panic for a second when you leave. You're like, oh, shoot, I forgot my phone. That was the best afternoon. I wandered around and had no idea if the house was burning down or what was happening over on the other side of the world. And there was something, it brought me back to an earlier time when we weren't reachable, when we used to be able to go out and people didn't know where we were and like what was going on. And there was a freedom of just even being able to think, allowing my thoughts to sort of wander into things and ponder different things. And so I think it is like a muscle that needs to be used. And how do we begin to do that? Like, what are some of the practical things that we could do to start cultivating silence? I think one thing is we have to turn off our phones. Sometimes we have to make ourselves unreachable at an appropriate time. And that's just one thing, but maybe we can talk through what are some practical things that you guys do or that we all do to cultivate silence in our life.
I think for me, I really noticed that we have a new app that we have to get on our phone for our new car insurance, and like it's a hands-free app. It doesn't make a difference. Like even if you put on your little holder in the car, you can't. They'll even charge you if you're talking on the phone in the car, even on Bluetooth, which I think is totally unfair, by the way. But anyway, but I realized even if you're listening to a podcast, even because it's distracted driving. So I've been just driving in my car like in silence. And it drives my teenage kids absolutely insane. Like they don't know what to do with it. Like they get in the car, like, can we turn on music? Can we turn on this? Can I hook my phone up? Can I do all? I was like, or we can sit in silence, or we could just talk to one another. They're just like, oh my goodness, wow. But I realized for me, I thrive in silence. I actually grow in silence. So when no one is in my house, I make sure like I don't even have background music on, which sometimes I do, like when I'm cooking dinner or whatever. But like I just go about my day doing my activities in silence. And I started when I walk the first 25 minutes, I don't listen to anything. I take my AirPods out. I do all of that. I just listen. And it's funny because that's talk about being sacrament to the present moment. I'm like, oh, listen to that bird. Oh, listen to this. Listen to that. Like you're actually aware and you're present in your body, into the environment around you. But it's funny. It happens almost every time. I'll be 8 or 10 minutes into my walk in silence. And then it's like the Lord starts speaking. I can hear his voice. It's like I move my body. I can start, and it's probably one of the times in my day where I do my deepest prayer is just on that walk. It's just finding little pockets of time. I think it doesn't have to be this long, extended personal retreat, which we'll get to that, how important a personal retreat is, but it's just little pockets of time. And I know, like we were talking about it earlier before, for young moms, you're like, gosh, I wish I had like even 5 minutes to go to the bathroom by myself. But it's like, all right, where can you get 5 minutes of just quiet? Is it hiding somewhere in your house or whatever you have to do? So those are some of my thoughts. What about you, Heather?
Yeah, I think for young moms, it's important to ask for it. Like that's
Amen.
sometimes what's needed is actually need to make a request, like to my husband or to my mom or my mother-in-law or somebody who can take the kids for a short time just so that I can be quiet for a little bit. And I understand the tension is, but I have so many other things that have to get done during that time. And that's why I like what you're saying, Michelle, is like, could it just be 5 minutes, 5 minutes and just breathe, just silent and breathe. And just maybe with every breath, just saying, come Holy Spirit. Or Jesus, I lay everything at your feet. Jesus, I lay everything at your feet. It just sort of like allow that to lead you into a place of just complete quiet. And that's sometimes we need the bridge is what I'm saying. So even in my prayer time, my mind runs very rapidly and I have a lot of thoughts, and I have to battle that. So one of the bridges for me is to start listening to just very gentle music that doesn't have any words to it, that will start to calm my mind down enough to where then I can turn the music off and just be in a place of silence, because the goal is communion. It's not just the action of being silent.
Amen.
The goal is communion. And sometimes we need to allow the calming things to occur so that we can get to that place. I love this quote, St. Paul of the Cross again. He said, "So do this, be in God's presence with a pure and simple, loving attention to his immense good, in a sacred silence of love, resting the whole of your spirit in his holy silence against the loving breast of our eternal God." I'm like, oh, that sounds like relief, and Jesus is relief. He is the rest for our soul that we need, and we will meet him most deeply in the quiet. Yeah. How about you, sister?
Those are such great tools for input and wisdom that you both have offered. And I know for myself, I mean, in many ways, it's a blessing being a religious sister, because so much of our day is built in silence. So there's I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for it. I avoided silence. I think I've said before on the podcast for so long. It just, because that's exactly when all of my things I didn't want to think about or talk about would come to the surface. And so I always would have to have something distracting me because I was afraid to be present to the present moment. And so I think one of the best blessings of entering religious life now for so many years is just, it's part of our life now. But it's something I also take a great pains to guard as well. Like I know in the morning, that's my first thing in the morning is a cup of coffee with Jesus. And that time I notice and I appreciate what you said, Heather, about communion is the goal, not the silence, because sometimes something happens or you have to do something or somebody needs to ride to the airport or something, like where it's like, and it's interesting how like when our quote unquote little routine is interrupted, we get really cranky and like unvirtuous. I'm like, that's not the point. That's missing something there. Silence is not the idol, but it's the means to an end. And, but to guard that and to guide that and to just allow the Lord to continue to open those places and to be okay with that. And just to tell our listeners, and I think we all notice it in our lives, it's okay to be restless. If you notice that in yourself, that's okay. You're not quote unquote doing it wrong. And those are things you could talk about to the Lord of like, Lord, I'm afraid, I'm feeling restless. Lord, I want to check my phone, or I want to, talk to somebody, or I'm afraid of what you're bringing up here. That's okay. And even just, some of the holiest people I know, they do annual 9-day silent retreats. And I was really grateful because one of them was just telling me a couple months ago that even for him, the first couple of days are hard because he has to come off this. He's got a lot of responsibility. And he said it just takes him 2 or 3 days to finally settle down into the silence. And then after that, he really can dive in. I was just like, thank you so much for saying that, because I think for a lot of us, we think I should do it perfectly and I should be okay with it and it shouldn't bother me. It's okay. It's okay. But if we can move through that, then we get to the deeper places. But if we just stop there, then go back to our formal way or to distract ourselves, we're never going to be able to allow the Lord to invite us more deeply. And Jesus, he just wants to be with us. He just wants to spend time with us like any other best friend in our life. He just wants to share with us and to receive our heart and just to be with us. We don't have to do anything with him, just to be. That's the best gift we could give him. Like that consoles his heart.
Yeah. And as we mentioned, like things get stirred up and the Lord might be putting his finger on something, to always hold with that. Even some people might be like, yeah, that's exactly why I don't want to be silent. And that's why I'm not going to be. And to just remember with what you're saying, sister, too, like he is a God of love. His love is never absent. Like even in the moments where he might be pressing or just like gently awakening our heart to something, his presence is always love, always, even if, there's a little bit of discipline that needs to come in, it's always love. And he never will leave us there. Never. That's not the point. He never just wants to poke at things, just to poke at things. That might be other people in our life that do that. But that's not the kind of God we have.
And just for a practical stance for anyone, like when your mind gets restless, one of the things that I started doing, which actually my previous spiritual director advised me, is like when things come up in prayer, like for women, it's our to-do list. Like, oh my gosh, I can't forget this. Like I'll be in prayer. I'm like, oh my gosh, did so-and-so bring their soccer cleat? Is I keep a little pad next to me and write down that thing. And then I go back to prayer, because if not, it'll be just stirring. And that way I can come back to it. If I'm walking, I have my notes open, like my to-do list. I put it on there and then I keep going and then I redirect myself back. But it's something about just writing it down helps me realize, I can let it go for that moment because I won't forget it. And then another thing is one of my spiritual directors several years ago, we're talking 10 or 12 years ago, one of his requirements at all of them been is that I make a personal retreat. And it was really hard in the season when he asked me to, because that was, I had a lot of littles and they're stair stepped. And I always laugh when a mom goes somewhere, even now when I travel or go, I was like, so I always tell Chris, one does simply not walk out of Mordor, like, Lord of the Rings, like a mom just can't just simply go on a retreat. And even now I try to do my personal retreats in Advent, which I'm always like I feel like Lord has to part the Red Sea with like our calendars and stuff. But so you have to prepare, like you have to prepare to go on a retreat. Like it just doesn't happen. But once I did, I noticed it's like when you go away with your spouse or something, it just rejuvenates you. But those retreats have become almost they are a guiding light for the next year for me, my personal retreats. They are really like landmarkers in my spiritual journey. And first of all, like to start small. I even advise young moms if they could do a desert day, like just go someplace, whether it's a coffee shop or whatever, get time, adoration, do whatever, do a desert day. Yes, you have to plan. Yes, other people have to do that. But that investment it's an investment into you. Yeah. That you have to make that investment, like to plan those days. And it takes intentional time, which I'm like you. But like I was even thinking like, all right, when am I going to do my personal retreat this year? And I usually do it in December. I can't because my husband and I are going away and doing a personal retreat. So like it's like a priority. Actually, I'm planning it today. Like when in January am I going to do my personal retreat? When is that time? Because for me, it still takes, like, this is what you were saying, it still takes me a full 24 hours to get quiet. Like it does right now. For those of you that only have a couple of hours, the Lord knows your situation. It is the loaves and the fishes. Just meet him where he's at. Like he will come. He knows where you are. Just come and just be, and he will meet you there. And like, there is no perfect prayer time. Like we would love like the candle and the cozy blanket, and all the different things. Sometimes you get that. Sometimes you don't. And the Lord is with you in whatever situation, whatever season you're in, but be intentional. Like you have to plan date nights for your spouse, plan a date night, date day, date getaway with the Lord.
Get morning, whatever it is.
Whatever it is. Yep, exactly.
What do you think is, I know some people are probably going, where would I do like an 8-day silent retreat? Like do we have resources that we can put in the show notes for people? Do you guys know of some?
I have a couple of people that we can do. I know retreats. I know like the Archdiocese of Atlanta and a couple other ones have silent retreats on their calendar. I think our diocese does too, Pensacola, Tallahassee.
Yeah. So maybe contact their diocese first, and maybe like a local abbey if you have one. Like we have one 15 minutes from our house, and I know that they allow people to come and stay there or whatever. Sister, what would you suggest?
I was just going to say the same thing. I would look at your diocesan website and maybe see if there's somebody who knows, or ask if you look around, if you have different monasteries in the area, or even retreat centers. Many times local retreat centers will offer even a weekend retreat, and it may not be totally silent, but you can make it silent. Like you're a grown up, like you can have meals on your own. It's okay. People are going to, they will respect that. If you want to go and listen to the talks and then be by yourself in solitude, most retreat centers will make that accommodation. And so, so look for a local retreat center in your area. And then there's some, big nationally known ones, but I would, that's great. And like you both said, it takes planning, but it's worth it. And that's, and even when we feel like God is silent with us, his presence is always there. And it's through that communion that we come back to give to the people in our life that we love. Otherwise, it's easy for us to get depleted, or it's easy for us to lose focus, and then our loves are out of order. And the Lord's always trying to order our loves. And so, for each one of us, trying to find that in our own way, but also just for all of us as a community, as a podcast community, of how can we allow the Lord to cultivate this in our life so that it really becomes a way of life, of that regular silence and solitude, no matter what it looks like. How does that help? How do we help grow in communion with that?
That's good.
Heather Kim, would you like to offer your one thing for our listeners this week?
Yes. So a little story. So my one thing is International Justice Mission.
I love them.
This is one of my favorite charities, along with Mary's Meals. These two are my absolute favorite. And so this week I got to go to their fundraising dinner in Vancouver. And wow, what a gift to be there to hear the story. So anyway, I was sitting at the table, and this one woman was asking, what connected you with International Justice Mission? And I said, well, actually 9 years ago, I was watching a conference called If Gathering. And there was a woman who shared, and she was a survivor. And that story ruined my life in the best way. And it just, so International Justice Mission, they work to protect people from violence, rescuing victims from sex trafficking, and bringing criminals to justice. And they do the whole full circle. Anyway, this woman looked at me and she said, that was me. She said, That was me. And
way.
she said, I cannot believe that you're here because of that. And she said, I've actually only shared my story twice in public. And that was the first time I'd ever shared it.
Oh my
And so it was like, no one really knows her story. And I was just like, oh, what? Like, what are the chances? So it was just so special. And then that night, you know, we heard from another survivor, just such powerful stories. These people are doing some of the most powerful work, and they actually are changing things. Like, that's what I loved about everything that I heard. They said, in certain countries, we're reducing all of this by like 50 to 86%. We are working ourselves out of a job in many places in the world. And I was like, oh my goodness, you don't normally hear that. You know, you hear people who are like really working hard, but the impact is like so difficult because they're so small. These are networked so broadly, and they have really excellent people working for them, and they're making a difference. So anyway, the info's in the show notes, but I love that. And it just blessed me so deeply. And again, it was one of those things where when we're scrolling and we hear a story, we're like, that's so hard and painful. And we scroll right by it. When you have to sit there for a couple of hours and just be faced with something really hard in the world, wow, does that rouse your heart in a different way to respond, you know? So anyway, that was a super cool blessing.
Powerful.
Yeah. How about you, Michelle?
My one thing is actually the Poco podcast, and they actually did an episode on silence also, which I didn't know before we did ours, but my son listens to them. I listen to them too, but on silence. So I'm going to post that in the show link. Probably very different than ours, but you know, it's still great. I love those guys. Sister, what about you?
My one thing for the week, speaking of silence and solitude, is a book called The Greatest Philosopher Who Ever Lived by Dr. Peter Kreeft, and it's about Our Lady. And it's just really lovely. He said he wrote a book on the 100 greatest philosophers in the world, and he said they were all men. And he said, I realized I forgot the greatest one, which is a woman. It's Our Lady. And so if you want to spend some time in your silence and solitude reading about Our Lady, about a woman who kept all these things and pondered them in her heart, and it's just written into Peter Kreeft form. I just love him. It's almost like you can hear him. I have the real book, not an audio book, but you could just hear his mannerisms and his way of sharing. So that might bless you as well. So The Greatest Philosopher Who Ever Lived, it's in your show notes. So
that's great.
Well, dear friends, thank you so much for joining us this week. We want to remind you again that we are doing the book. We're going to walk through the book, The Read of God by Carol Houselander for Advent this year. So you want to grab that book as soon as you can. And don't worry, we're going to post the reading schedule, and we're going to offer discussion questions and things like that. And just to tell you once again that you don't have to read the chapter before we talk about it. You can just walk with us along the way. You don't even have to read the book. You can just come along. So, but we just wanted to tell you. So The Read of God by Carol Houselander is our choice for our Advent adventure this year. So want to grab that and come along with us. So any last words, ladies?
Well, they can find all of that info, the reading schedule and everything on our website, abidingtogetherpodcast.com. It's right there for them.
Wonderful. Well, Michelle, get your game face on, girl. Rock on with your meetings today. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, friends, for being with us this week. And until next week, we will be abiding together. God bless you. Have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you liked it, would you please share it with a friend and leave us a review? We encourage you to head over to our website, abidingtogetherpodcast.com, where you can find all the show notes, links to our One Things, group discussion questions for each episode, and beautiful coffee mugs, t-shirts, journals, and prints in our shop. There you can also subscribe to receive our weekly email with links to each new episode and all of the content. We'd love to connect on social media and invite you to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter so you can catch inspiring reflections every day. You're also welcome to join our private Facebook group and dive deeper into discussions with our fellow listeners. If the podcast has blessed you, would you prayerfully consider financially supporting us? The Abiding Together podcast is only available due to the generous support of our listeners. There are significant costs associated with creating this content, such as tech support, design, website, equipment, and hired staff that we need to be able to continue offering great content. Abiding Together is a nonprofit 501c3, and all donations are tax deductible. You can make donations of any amount through the Patreon website, or you can send us a check directly if that's easier for you. If you donate $15 or more per month on our Patreon page, you become a tribe member, and you will receive bonus content every month, such as recipes, music playlist, downloadable prints, and more. You can find all the information at patreon.com/abidingtogetherpodcast. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.